My adopted son called me Mom at Thanksgiving, and my father lost it. He told me I didn't deserve that title because I never gave birth. It was one of those Sunday dinners that pretended to be warm and fuzzy, like a Hallmark movie on mute, while the underlying soundtrack was judgment, pressure, and that silent parental condemnation that cuts worse than anything screaming ever could. The dining room table was arranged the same as it had been when I was a child. Mom's roast chicken, Dad's mashed potatoes with excessive butter. My grandmother insisted on giving me a horrible crocheted table runner for Christmas when I was 16, and it strangely never went. My sister Phoebe was already glowing before she said anything, sitting there in a soft lilac sweater that looked like she'd just stepped out of a pregnant photo shoot, her fingers nervously twitching toward the waistband of her pants, as if her barely there baby bulge needed protection from words. Life itself. Then she said it, her voice trembling and her husband Nate squeezing her hand beneath the table. She informed them that they were expecting. Just like that. There was no build-up, drama, or dessert course, only 3 words that exploded across the room like an emotional explosion. We're having a baby. My mother screamed, literally screamed, and then burst into tears in the way that women do when their entire soul decides to pour forth. My father stood up, walked up to Phoebe, and gave her one of those rare reverent hugs that made you wonder if he was ever softer, more human. Then came the line. The one that knocked the wind out of me and still sounds like a poor echo in an empty room. My father stepped away from the hug, turned to Mom and said, "Now this. This is what real success looks like." He didn't say anything intentionally to harm me, I believe. He spoke it like a man proclaiming a touchdown at a football game, or like a proud coach on the sidelines celebrating his team's victory. But the instant he uttered that, I felt my chest sink in, like if something ancient within me had been crushed forever. I still grinned. I smiled because I'm an expert at pretending. I grinned because I've spent time in antiseptic doctors' offices, covered in paper gowns that shred too easily while some stranger with a clipboard tells you your eggs are exhausted, your uterus is difficult, or your body simply doesn't cooperate as it should. I grinned since the last time I broke down in front of them. My mother handed me herbal tea and advised me to calm down. Maybe it's all in your head. I smiled because I needed to. Because what else would I do? Toss my plate across the room? Shout about hormone shots, operations and miscarriages that they had no idea about? Tell them I was once 12 weeks pregnant and lost it in a goddamn Walgreens toilet stall while no one answered the phone? I smiled. I watched as they celebrated her. And I clinked my wine glass to theirs. And I told Phoebe how delighted I was for her. I actually meant it in some ways. She did not ask to be the golden kid. She did not construct the pedestal that they placed her on. Hell, maybe she just wanted to get off it and be viewed as a normal person. However, the fire continued to burn. That did not deter the truth. I was 38 years old, infertile, and considered a failure by my parents. Do you know what hurts the most? They knew. They knew what I had gone through. They'd sat in the hospital waiting room after my ectopic pregnancy nearly killed me. When I returned home from my 3rd failed round of IVF, they had brought over casseroles and I couldn't stop crying long enough to eat. They had seen me spend 5 years of savings on a fantasy that would not come true. They knew everything. Phoebe was pregnant, therefore none of that mattered. Phoebe, who had stated that she didn't want children until she was at least 40. Phoebe, who became pregnant 6 months after her wedding without trying. Phoebe's life appeared to unfold on cue, like a well-rehearsed stage play. After dinner, I lingered behind to assist clean up while they swarmed around Phoebe in the living room, caressing her stomach as if it were a magic lantern. I scrubbed dishes in silence, letting the water run for too long, pretending to be busy so I wouldn't have to sit and listen to them choose baby names as if they were planning investment portfolios. When I finally got into my car that night, the cold hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. I turned on the ignition, peered straight ahead into the dark driveway, and whispered to myself something I hadn't said in months. They believe I will never be a mother. I squeezed the driving wheel till my knuckles became white. They were wrong. My pupils narrowed, and I felt a tiny spark ignite someplace deep within me. Low, nasty, and fearsome. Dead wrong. When you quit fighting the same damn struggle over and over, you get a sense of silence. A silence that does not bring calm or relief, but rather a lingering ache, as if your body remembers the conflict even after it has ended. After the final unsuccessful IVF effort, I did not yell, cry, or damage anything. I simply sat on the edge of my bed, staring at a solitary crimson dot on the sheet, and I knew it was over. Not because physicians say so. Not because I could not afford another round. But something inside me, something I hadn't realized still had a voice, finally whispered, "Enough." For months following, I moved like a ghost through my own life, going to work, answering texts, and pretending to laugh at baby showers, all while my insides felt hollowed out like a cursed pumpkin on Halloween. I removed all fertility apps from my phone. I packaged up the baby onesies I'd bought on impulse. Someone had handed me a little crocheted hat just in case. I kept the sonogram photo buried at the back of my nightstand. Then I flung the box into the attic, closed the door, and convinced myself I was finished. However, just because you finish something doesn't imply you're no longer feeling it. The grief persisted in unusual ways. I did cry at dog food commercials and avoid the diaper section at the grocery store like it was radioactive. And then one day, at 3 a.m., I found myself going through my phone and reading about volunteer opportunities in the city. I'm not sure what I was looking for. Perhaps a distraction. Perhaps a motivation to get out of bed. Perhaps a life raft. What I discovered was a juvenile mentoring program at a neighboring shelter. They dubbed it Haven House, and it wasn't particularly fancy. The paint was chipped, the lighting in the corridor flickered, and the couches in the recreation area appeared to have seen better days. But there was warmth in that place. A raw, tired warmth that did not require much more than regularity and care. So I signed up. The first several weeks the youngsters had no idea what to do with me. I did not blame them. I was simply another adult who showed up smiling and definitely wouldn't stay long. But I continued to show there, week after week. I played board games, read books, assisted with math homework, and tried not to cry in the parking lot afterwards. By the age of 8, some of those children had witnessed more darkness than most people do in their whole lives. They didn't need me to change anything. They simply needed someone who did not go. And this is how I met Jamal. He was 10 years old when I first noticed him, constantly sitting in the corner of the recreation room with his hoodie drawn up and a notebook in his lap. He didn't say much, but his eyes followed everything. And when he did talk, it was usually crisp and unexpected, as if he had been accumulating thoughts and deliberately rationing them out. By the third week, he was calling me Miss K, a gentle moniker that made my heart twist slightly every time. He was the type of kid who pretended he didn't need anyone, but you could tell he needed someone to question why he never smiled in photos. Someone to notice when he was quiet for too long. Later, I learned that his mother had died of an overdose 2 years before, and his father had vanished into another state with a new partner and a different life. Most people couldn't grasp how alone Jamal was. And maybe that's why we connected, because I was also alone. I started coming more frequently. For more than 3 years, I visited that shelter practically every day of the week. That equates to about 400 days every year. I packed snacks, board games, and books. I showed him how to make scrambled eggs without scorching them and how to mend a button on his shirt. We created cardboard cities, paper planes, and, finally, routines. Some days, he'd sit next to me and say nothing, which was okay. Other days, he'd talk for hours, telling me stories about students at school and a dream he had in which we lived in a house with a red door and a dog named Clutch. He used to call me Miss K, but when he forgot, he'd just say Mom. He always corrected himself straight away, but each time he did it, it drove something deeper into me, like a reality neither of us was quite ready to admit out loud. I never mentioned it, never made it awkward. I simply let it sit there, calm and warm, like a small seed waiting for the right season. Then one Thursday. It had been a grueling week. One of those weeks where work was horrible. My vehicle battery broke, and I received a message from my sister boasting about her baby learning to walk. I arrived at the shelter drained and exhausted. I didn't even attempt to fake it. I simply dropped into the couch next to Jamal, closed my eyes, and exhaled like if my soul were spilling out. He did not say anything for a while. He then said, so softly that I almost missed it, "Are you okay?" I nodded, too tired to lie, and said, "Just a hard day." Jamal remained silent again for a few beats. Then he glanced up at me, his voice scarcely more than a whisper, and spoke something that ripped my heart open. "Can I be with you forever?" And all of a sudden, everything I thought I understood about the course of my life changed. Because I wasn't finished. Not really. I had just begun working on something unexpected. There's a type of strength that doesn't make itself known with shouted voices or clenched fists, but rather quietly sneaks into your bones, like a second skeleton built of resolve. That was the kind of strength I needed as I began the adoption process for Jamal. An arduous, humiliating, slow-motion crawl through a system that seemed intent on reminding me at every turn that I was insufficient. Not married, not affluent, not young, and not ideal. Just a lady with a hurting heart, a steady income, and a son who'd already begun to beckon her home with his eyes even before the paperwork gave us approval. The initial appointment by Child Protective Services felt more like an interrogation than an examination. The caseworker sat in my too-clean living room, clicking her pen every few seconds like a metronome to calm my worries. She inquired about how I punished Jamal, what I would do if he was suspended, what trauma training I had undergone, and how I would manage him acting out. I wanted to scream, "Love is the answer to every goddamn question." Instead, I nodded, handed her written documents, and tried not to quiver as she perused my bookcase, as if it held the secrets of my soul. Every step involved a new hoop: background checks, house visits, court filings, psychological tests, and parenting classes. I jumped through them all, wounded my spirit on a couple, and kept my voice quiet when it would have been so much easier to shout. I did not tell my parents what I was doing. I didn't tell my sister either. I knew what type of response I'd get, and I wasn't prepared to hear it. Not from folks who still linked family with biology and acted as if my uterus was a requirement for legitimacy. I wasn't prepared for the glances of sympathy, the patronizing advice, or worse, the judgment masquerading as care. Meanwhile, their universe spun in a strange orbit, with everything centered on Phoebe's swelling tummy. Every day the group chat was filled with ultrasound photographs, stroller advice, name surveys, and links to pastel-themed Pinterest boards. My mother began signing off texts with phrases like, "Love Grandma-to-be," as if a pregnancy was rewriting her entire identity. It was like seeing a movie in which you weren't cast, just an extra standing off on the side while the credits rolled without your name appearing. Then came the baby shower. My sister's closest friend hosted the event in an upmarket venue with gold-trimmed invitations and a gift registry that featured a $500 diaper pail. I received the invitation late, presumably as an afterthought, and almost did not go at all. But something in me, perhaps spite, boldness, or perhaps a fundamental human want to be seen, decided to show up. I arrived late on purpose, strolling in after the games had begun and the wine had been poured, clutching my purse, which contained the adoption approval paperwork neatly folded between a card and a $20 baby blanket I had picked up at the last minute. Nobody saw me at first. My mother was holding court beside the mimosa bar, laughing loudly and never moving her hand away from Phoebe's rotund tummy, as if it were a treasured relic. My father was off in a corner, nodding along to another dad's story about car seats and sleep training. No one looked up when I walked in, not even my sister, who was busy unpacking a mountain of pink-wrapped gifts and thanking everyone with that bright, camera-ready smile that makes everything feel like a staged photo op. I remained near the back, pretending to admire the decorations. Everything was white and gold, with delicate blush accents, as if they intended to raise this child with an Instagram filter. A heart-shaped balloon arch stood above the cake table, with the main attraction displayed like a wedding centerpiece. It was a three-tiered masterpiece, fondant flowers and delicious pearls, and it read, "Finally, a true mother in the family." The remarks were like a stomach punch. I'm not sure who wrote them, or if they meant it as a shot at me or simply didn't think about it. But it landed with surgical precision. I stood there staring at the cake, as laughing flowed around me like background noise in a dream. I grabbed into my handbag, felt the edges of that crisp approval letter, and remembered every night I'd stayed up wondering about whether I'd be able to keep Jamal. I remembered how the first time he had a nightmare, he crawled into my bed and said, "Don't leave, okay?" I reflected on how many people considered children as accessories, status symbols, or trophies. Yet he was none of these. He was my son, not because we shared DNA, but because we chose each other amid a world that attempted to tell us we weren't worthy of love. I leaned in closer to the cake, close enough that no one else could hear me, and let the words come out slowly and steadily, like a promise engraved in stone. We'll see about that. The drive to your childhood home around the holidays brings to the surface everything you thought you'd buried under years of treatment, hard-earned distance, and selective amnesia. The trees, the broken sidewalks, the porch light your father hasn't fixed since last winter, it all comes back to you like a rush of unwelcome memories. And yet, there I was, clutching the steering wheel a bit too tightly, peering in the rearview mirror every few minutes at Jamal, who sat in the back seat like a bundle of anxieties wrapped in a clip-on tie, and the kind of sweater that makes little boys appear like tiny professors. He'd been quiet the entire ride, his gaze darting between the windows and his hands folded in his lap as if he were preparing for an exam no one had studied for. I did not blame him. It was his first meeting with them, not just my parents but the entire family in one spot. My sister, her husband, her kid, the cousins, the casserole crowd, and the judging panel. I attempted to explain that it might be overwhelming, and that they might not comprehend right away, but he simply nodded and said, "I got you, Miss K," which hurt me harder than it should have, given that he hadn't called me in weeks. The adoption had taken place 2 months earlier. Final, legal, done. He was mine in every manner that mattered, and yet, I hadn't informed my family. Not in person. I am not on a call. Not in a damn text. Perhaps it was cowardice. Perhaps it was self-preservation. Maybe it was that deep part of me that still believed they'd find a way to damage it, reduce it, and deprive it of the meaning it had come to represent. But now the secret was sitting in my back seat, swinging his feet and clutching a homemade card in his hand, which said, "Happy Thanksgiving," in pencil, and had a poorly drawn turkey wearing sunglasses. I put the car in park, took a deep breath, and returned my gaze to him. "You ready?" I inquired, my voice firm despite the fact that my stomach was flipping. He flashed me a half smile, more bold than happy, and added, "Yeah, I guess." Then he opened the door and walked outside, his shoes crunching on the gravel like the first note of a symphony I had no idea how to conduct. The house smelled of sage, cinnamon, and too many expectations. The living room was noisy, with voices chatting over one another, and the TV was broadcasting a football game that no one was watching. My sister was there, of course, with a baby on her hip and dressed as if she were hosting a cookery show rather than feeding her relatives. My parents were orbiting her like moons around a sun, their entire focus gravitationally drawn to the writhing bundle of new life she carried. Initially, no one noticed us walking in. I stood in the doorway with Jamal close to me, clutching my hand tighter than usual. He didn't say anything, just gazed up at me with wide, hesitant eyes, as if he were waiting for a signal. So I handed him one. I clasped his hand back, smiled, and entered the room. My mother was the first to notice. She turned, blinked as if she were seeing a ghost, and then forced a smile that was too wide to be genuine. "Oh, you made it, honey," she exclaimed, her voice full of helium and habit, her gaze straying to Jamal for a split second before returning to the infant as if she couldn't afford to lose focus on anything else. I introduced him casually, like I would any friend. "This is Jamal. He's with me now." This was all I said. There was no fanfare, no explanation, just the truth said quietly, as if it were a question no one dared to ask. Jamal did not say anything either. He remained close, polite and silent, most likely trying not to make the wrong move. He helped carry in the pie, laid the napkins, and grinned as my aunt ruffled his hair as if he were a pet she didn't know how to greet. No one questioned who he truly was. Nobody inquired why he was there. They simply accepted his presence like they would accept the weather. Quietly, passively, and with little discomfort when it got too close. Dinner was full of light talk and false laughter. This is the type of discourse that only touches the surface. Phoebe's kid was treated like royalty, kissed, cooed at, and praised as if he were a small god sent to confirm my parents' every life decision. I saw them light up whenever he drooled, farted or sneezed. And I sat there quietly, carving the turkey into little pieces for Jamal, ensuring he had enough gravy, and letting my silence speak for itself. Then something happened. Halfway through dinner, as we passed around the mashed potatoes, Jamal looked up from his plate, his voice mild but distinct enough to break through the pointless talk going on around the table. "Mom," he asked, "can you pass the mashed potatoes?" The room froze. Forks hovered in midair. Glasses halted in the middle of a sip. Conversations ended in throats. The quiet was so heavy that I believed it might break the walls. Jamal did not appear to notice. Perhaps he did, but claimed not to. He calmly stared at me, waiting for the potatoes, as if nothing had happened. I handed them to him without hesitation, smiled pleasantly and replied, "Of course." My father broke the silence, choking as if the phrase had gotten stuck in his throat, his face a slow-burning shade of perplexity, and something dangerously close to wrath. "What did he just call you?" he said, his voice cutting and low. as if he already knew the answer, but despised it more than he could express. And I stared him dead in the eye with a serenity I hadn't felt in years, thinking, now we begin. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes after truth is thrown like a stone into a still, shallow pond. The kind that doesn't break loudly, but instead ripples outward, spreading discomfort through every corner of the room, drawing eyes to the floor and stopping smiles in their tracks. That's how it felt after my father asked the question. After Jamal addressed me as Mom. The mask cracked, and the family act we'd all been putting on crumbled under the weight of a single honest phrase. The worst part was that it felt so familiar. As if we'd been preparing for this moment our entire lives. Like the awkwardness was just waiting for the right spark to ignite. I did not flinch. I did not stammer. I looked him in the eye, the same face that had kissed my skinned knees, repaired my bike chain, and taught me how to drive a stick shift. And I firmly stated, he's my son. The room went insane in 3 seconds flat. My sister let out a breathy scoff, as if someone had just thrown a glass of red wine across her white carpet. Seriously, she exclaimed, pushing her fork down so violently that the dish rocked beneath it. You couldn't let one day be about me? You had to pull this? Now what? You adopt a kid and think that makes you a mom? I did not respond to her. Not right away. I saw my mother's face shift between confusion and anguish, her lips shaking as if she were going to deliver a monologue she'd been practicing in the mirror for decades. She blinked too many times before whispering, "You adopted him? You didn't even tell us." 6 months ago, I answered, maintaining my voice level. It was finalized in August. The room blurred around the edges, a cacophony of overlapping voices, forks clattering, and someone jumping up too quickly and knocking over a chair. Jamal grasped my hand tightly under the table, his eyes wide and watching. And I wanted to gather him up and carry him somewhere peaceful, somewhere kind. But I did not move. I remained planted. Let the storm rage around us. Allow them to show me who they were when they weren't in control of the story. My father rose up slowly, as if about to give a verdict, and gazed at me with disdain that felt like acid in his teeth. That's not the same, he replied. You didn't give birth. You didn't. He paused and shook his head. You didn't make him. And that was all. That was the line. The last crack in the dam. I stood up, raised my glass. Not for a toast, but to cut. And let each word fall harsh and slow, like a blade dragged across years of quiet. You want to speak about what makes a true mother? Is it blood? Is it a hospital bracelet and a baby photo in a scrapbook you never read again? Or is it sitting through court hearings, trauma counselors, and nights when a 10-year-old wakes up screaming from dreams he can't explain? Is love something you earn, rather than something that just happens to be in your DNA? My mother whispered my name as a warning, but I refused to stop. Not now. Not after swallowing their silence for years. Let's talk about success, I replied, letting my gaze travel over them. Let's discuss how you define it. Is it the daughter who gave you a grandchild to brag about on Facebook? The one who did everything in the proper order, even when she didn't want to? Or is it the daughter who constructed a life after everything came apart, who never gave up on a child no one else cared about? Phoebe mumbled, Jesus, you're really doing this now? And pushed back her chair, as if she were about to escape. But I wasn't finished. I laid down my glass and dropped the final piece which I'd been carrying for years like a stone in my chest. I was pregnant once, I remarked, calm, bland and definitive. You just never noticed. You were too busy praising someone else's stomach. The room fell into startled stillness. I did not elaborate. I didn't say when, how or what happened afterward. I didn't give them closure or clarity. They hadn't earned it. Allow them to sit with it. Allow them to experience just once what it was like to be unaware, to wonder, to mull over an answer they would never receive. Jamal looked up at me, his hand still wrapped around mine, and I felt a shift. Not forgiveness. Not even pride. Just a sense of serenity in knowing that I had finally reclaimed the story they had stolen. I turned to him, crouched slightly and whispered, Are you ready to go, kid? He nodded, put his small hand into mine, and we went past the astonished table, past the unspoken judgments and broken illusions, past the cold turkey and the unfinished pie, and out the front door without looking back. As we got to the porch, he paused, tugged my sleeve and murmured, Mom. Yeah, I responded, knowing I'd never grow weary of hearing it. He didn't say anything else but hugged me tightly, face pushed against my stomach. At that point, it made little difference how many of them didn't comprehend. It didn't matter who disagreed or remained stuck in their own narrow definitions. Because some scars do not show. Some families are not blood-related. And some vengeance is as easy as being called mom at the appropriate time. And behind that closed door, my father finally lowered his gaze.